Hello, everyone. I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsey Wilson University Office of Public Relations, and this is The View from the Hill, the podcast of Lindsey Wilson University. Every week during the academic year, The View from the Hill features conversations with some of the people who help create the dynamic, living, learning environment that serves the educational needs of every Lindsey Wilson student every day. In this 20th podcast of the 2025-2026 school year, we'll preview the Lindsey Wilson Arts and Humanities Irish Film Series. We'll also hear about an upcoming study abroad trip to Ireland during this year's spring break. Every Tuesday evening during the month of February, folks will have an opportunity to learn about the last century of Irish culture and anti-colonial struggle through the lens of 4 films. That's all thanks to the Lindsey Wilson University School of Arts and Humanities. The Lindsey Wilson Arts and Humanities Irish Film Series will feature 4 films that will take the audience members through the last century of Irish history. All 4 films will be screened at 7:30 in the evening in the recital hall of the W.W. Slider Humanities Center, and all 4 films, which are intended for high school students and older, are free and open to the public. Joining us to talk about the film series as well as an upcoming study abroad trip to Ireland are English professor Karolyn Steffens. She put together the film series along with 3 Lindsey Wilson students who will be making the trip across the Atlantic Ocean in March. Karolyn says the 4 films will give audience members a very good introduction to Irish history and culture of the last 100 years.
We're showing the films as part of the Literary Cultures class, which is focused on Irish identity this semester, and the students over spring break are going on a study abroad trip. So we're doing the film series to supplement the plays they're reading and the poetry they're reading, all of the literature they're immersing themselves in the classroom. The films are a supplement, especially because it brings so many of the performances to life. So it's very much a crash course in Irish identity of the 20th century, history and politics from the Irish War of Independence all the way to 2024 and Northern Ireland and the struggle still over the Irish language's legitimacy and the reunification of Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland.
Talk a little bit about the 4 films you'll be showing. As you mentioned, you go from the late 19 teens up until the 21st century.
Yeah, all 4 films are award-winning films. They're incredible performances. We're starting with The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which depicts the Irish War of Independence and actually stretches up to the Civil War that follows the War of Independence. It's the story of 2 brothers who are from a rural county in the south of Ireland, and they get swept up in the war because everyday people get swept up in the war and fighting for independence. And it really shows, the way that everyday people get involved in this, but also the strains that are put on when the Irish start fighting the Irish over these fights for independence and politics, when politics literally divide families in half, is what that first film is really showing us from the early 20th century. And then the second film is The Banshees of Inisherin, which is also an award-winning film, incredible performances as well. That one's even more theatrical. The study abroad trip is actually English and theater, and so all of the theater students in the class, I think, are really going to love this one because the performances are just so incredible. But it is set in the backdrop of the Irish Civil War, and it's about 2 friends on a rural island off the coast of Ireland who their friendship just falls apart suddenly one day, and they can't come back together. And it's these struggles of these friends for life who all of a sudden are just so divided. And the struggle that one of them, played by Colin Farrell, has in understanding why his best friend for so long just cannot get along with him anymore, and they cannot see eye to eye, and they don't have this shared identity anymore. So very much kind of the divisions that politics can bring to people, really.
And then you jump ahead a little bit, actually quite a bit, by 6 decades, and into a very tumultuous period that some of us remember quite a bit, the very famous hunger strikes of the late 1970s, early 1980s.
Yeah, so the second 2 films, you're right, jump to the late 20th century. The first one is Hunger by it's Steve McQueen is the director. He did 12 Years a Slave. He's so invested in showing oppressed peoples and their struggles. And so McQueen is looking at the hunger strike of Bobby Sands from 1981. Bobby Sands famously dies in the hunger strike, and he's played by Michael Fassbender in the film, and it's just another devastating performance performance in terms of showing the realities of how the Irish were treated in the prisons by the Northern Irish and British Guards. Fassbender, I think, loses just an insane amount of weight as part of this performance because you watch their treatment in the prisons and then his eventual demise, and dying for the reunification, right, of Ireland, and his beliefs, his political beliefs. And then we're jumping with the last film to 2024. The film is called Kneecap. It's about the band of the same name. Michael Fassbender also makes an appearance in this film. It is all about this Irish language rap trio who single-handedly today have made learning the Irish language cool again, right? So all of these people in Ireland today and all around the world actually are learning about the ways in which the Irish language was systematically stamped out by the British through the colonial process for the past 800 years. And famously, one of the band members, his father was a paramilitary in the IRA, and there's a line in the movie which is actually accurate because the band is played by themselves in the film, that the dad would say every single word you speak of the Irish language is a bullet fired against the British, right? And a bullet fired in the cause of freedom. And so they're a very political band, and they're really trying to use the language and music as a way to continue to fight for Irish identity and especially reunification.
Of course, storytelling is synonymous with Irish culture, and you would be hard-pressed to find another place or people in the world that have produced more stories and storytellers relative to its size than the Irish. As Karolyn points out, that's not bad for a country that's about the size of the state of Indiana.
Ireland is the same size as Indiana, so the joke we keep making is, well, do you think Indiana had produced this many Nobel laureates, for example, or this many playwrights, or this many actors and storytellers, like you said? And I think one of the things is spending 800 years fighting against a colonial occupation, you end up resorting to the arts and storytelling and these other ways of being heard, because if you don't have political representation, for example, for hundreds of years, you have to find a way to express yourself and find a way to fight back against these really pernicious stereotypes about the Irish that still exist today. This is actually the first day of the class. We started with several of the political cartoons that were published in British and American newspapers in the 19th century and the early 20th that depict the Irish in these really negative ways. And then we watched a video from Epic, is the museum that we're going to on the very last day of the trip. It's the Museum of Irish Immigration. And they had a video where they had asked AI to generate an image of an Irish man. And the images that AI generated were exactly like the caricatures you see in these political cartoons from the 19th century. So in many ways, these negative stereotypes of the Irish are still with us today. And again, they come out of this colonialist rhetoric. And so it's very interesting that I think the response that the Irish have had at many levels is telling their own narrative, telling their own story in response, as a way of working through this, as a way of asserting their own identity, their own version of themselves. The course is very much taking that sort of approach to answer that question, that it is a way of writing back and asserting an identity against these oppressive forces that try to define you.
I've not yet seen the film Hunger, that it will be the third in the festival. But what's interesting to me about that is that that's from a period when Ireland was on the front page of newspapers and on the evening newscast almost every night at one time. And it's interesting that this generation of college students might not appreciate how it was one of the big stories, the big flashpoints in politics, world politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I've taught Bobby Sands's, he wrote a diary when he was on his hunger strike, and I've taught his diary before in another class, and the students end up really liking it. We haven't gotten there yet this semester, so the students in the episode with us today haven't yet read it, but they really responded, especially to the ways in which rhetoric is being used to define the prisoners. Part of the big fight and why they go on a hunger strike, they go on a blanket strike before this where they refuse to wear the prison uniforms. They go on a no wash protest where they refuse to bathe themselves, all in protest for the ways in which they are being labeled criminal. And they're being labeled a criminal over and over and over again. And they're saying, no, they're political prisoners. But the fact that the British government will not see them as legitimate political prisoners and continues to call them a criminal or a terrorist, and won't allow them to have a political status. That's what the whole fight comes down to. And the rhetoric around it and the definitions, the self-definitions, I think that's the part that really spoke to the students when I've taught it in the past. They completely understand that part. And you see that very much today in so many different political instances in our own country and around the world. And so I think that's the part that resonates beyond 1981 or the late 70s, is the ways in which a government or the media can label people in a certain way and minimize the legitimacy of a political struggle, especially against, an occupying force.
You're listening to the Lindsey Wilson View from the Hill podcast. I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsey Wilson Office of Public Relations. I'm talking to the folks involved in a special Lindsey Wilson class that's examining Irish culture this spring. And as part of the course, the Lindsey Wilson Arts and Humanities Irish Film Series will be showing an Irish film every Tuesday evening at 7:30 Central Time in the recital hall of the W.W. Slider Humanities Center. You can read more about the series in the news section of the Lindsey Wilson website, and that URL is lindsey.edu/news. Now let's meet some of the students in English professor Karolyn Steffens' course on Irish culture, who will also be traveling to Ireland in March for a study abroad experience. Whitley Gibson is a junior from Edmonton, Kentucky. She's taking Karolyn's class not as an English major nor as a theater major, but rather she was drawn to the class because of family reasons.
I think most people have like an innate desire to see the world and travel. I could not pass up the opportunity to see Ireland. I've done 23andMe and I'm 97.5% British and Irish. And I got to go to England in May. So getting to go to Ireland this March is just an incredible opportunity. But I kind of have an interesting perspective compared to some of the other students in the class because most of those students are English and theater students. While I love English and theater, that is not my major. That's not my discipline. So it's really neat to be able to dive into those things while having no previous knowledge of these things and just really get to learn. And I'm really excited to have that deep understanding of Ireland. And like Dr. Steffens has mentioned, that connection to Appalachia and the area that we're in is very interesting. And I do feel like I have a strong connection to Appalachia, so it'll be neat to have both of those. But I'm also really excited to be surrounded with people on this trip who are also passionate about what we're learning about. It's evident that all the people in the class are very excited, of course, excited to go to Ireland, but also excited about what we're learning, how we're going to make those connections.
Senior Megan Whitson is from East Bernstadt, Kentucky. She's one of the course's English majors, and she said the study abroad trip appealed to her for several reasons.
I, like Whitley and Cheyenne, was also very drawn in by the possibility of the trip to Ireland, but as soon as I read the course description, it changed utterly, talking about Irish identity. I was very interested to kind of pick apart these ideas of colonialism and how that transcends through art, through writing. How can we be changed utterly through the things that we write to establish this identity? How do we see this in the Appalachian diaspora, which connects to Ireland? How do we see this in the way that these people fight back? But also, how can you fight back to people who have been there for hundreds of years? So I'm curious to learn more about it and do the writing for it. I'm kind of in agreement with Whitley in terms of the connections to bring back through Appalachian culture and everything, and just this idea of how we let occupational force reduce some of our own cultural strongholds. So just this idea of connecting this diaspora to what the Irish have experienced through this colonialism by the British Empire. But also I really love this idea, and we touched on it some, Dr. Steffens mentioned it, but I love this idea of how do we view this storytelling, and how do we use this storytelling to craft an identity, and how can we use that to keep writing back to all these forces who are still trying to kind of beat people down, and yeah, just making something beautiful out of it.
Cheyenne Lucer is a senior from Bremen, Kentucky, who's a theater major, and she's been cast in the upcoming production of Belfast Girls, which will be performed later this spring at Lindsey Wilson. It's also part of the students' examination of Irish culture and history. Cheyenne says this spring trip will be a first for her in several ways.
Yeah, so I've never actually been out of the country before, so the opportunity to go to Ireland and see a different part of the world was already a huge draw. And then adding in the fact that it was this mix of theater and English for the class, and I would get to study all these plays from Ireland. And I'm also going to be a part of the play Belfast Girls that we're doing this semester. It's just such a wonderful experience to be able to read these plays, read about the history of Ireland, and then also go there and experience their theater and experience some of the beautiful sites within Ireland.
I know you're still in the early stages of the production of Belfast Girls, but has the course or maybe the syllabus shaped at all how you're approaching your part in that play?
Oh, absolutely. So I know we recently discussed the Great Hunger, and I was looking at our prompts for our final project in the course, and you have the opportunity to talk about psychology in the Great Hunger. And I'm definitely really considering doing that because that's when this play takes place, is during that time coming out of the Great Hunger. And it's a huge part of that character, the trauma that she has been through because of the famine that was kind of forced on them because of the British. So it's definitely shaping how I look at her and how I portray her and her feelings towards the British. The thing I'm most looking forward to learning from this course is definitely that storytelling and how important storytelling is to Ireland and to America and to any country going through when you're fighting against political forces bigger than you. Although America is not in the same position as Ireland was during all those years, we definitely today are not a very unified country. And that is something that could very well be said for Ireland even to today. So learning how they used art and used storytelling to try to unify and to try to fight back against those forces that were bigger than them, that's what I'm very interested in learning more about.
Of course, a class like this, which includes a substantial study abroad experience, would not be possible without several generous friends of, as well as several generous friends at, Lindsey Wilson. And Karolyn Steffens says that she and the students are most grateful for their support.
I would just say thank you to so many people who have donated to make this trip possible. The students have been saving for this trip for 2 years at this point and doing monthly payments to be able to go. It's an incredible opportunity. I think 20% of the students going on the trip have never been on a plane. Been out of the country is even greater. So it's a really, really great opportunity. Everyone who donated during the All In campaign, thank you 1,000 times over. Dr. Jerry Westerfield is an incredible, incredible donor historically to theater, but this would not be possible without him. And thank you to everyone in the administration, especially President Lucky and the Board of Trustees and all of the administrators who made the seed funding possible this semester to make it possible for us to go.
That's English Professor Karolyn Steffens. She's organized the Lindsey Wilson Arts and Humanities Irish Film Series, which is being held every Tuesday evening in February. Karolyn is also among the university staff members who are taking 26 Lindsey Wilson students to Ireland in March for a study abroad experience. You also heard from 3 of the students who are in Karolyn's class and will be making that trip: Whitley Gibson, Cheyenne Lucer, and Megan Whitson. And that's going to do it for this 20th edition of View from the Hill for the 2025-2026 school year. Be sure to encourage your friends, co-workers, family members, associates, and neighbors to subscribe to View from the Hill. They can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, as well as on the university's YouTube channel. View from the Hill is produced by Shelby Burton. She's Lindsay Wilson's Assistant Director of Public Relations and Media Producer. And until our next edition, I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsay Wilson University Office of Public Relations. Thanks so much for listening. So long, everybody, and have a nice day.